The innocent's terror. The autumn breeze carried fallen leaves across the quiet streets of Riverside neighborhood as 11-year-old Sofia Rodriguez clutched her sketchbook to her chest. Her dark curls bounced with each step as she walked home from her after-school art class, proud of the watercolor painting she'd created of the city skyline. The streetlights began flickering to life as dusk settled in. Sofia checked her watch, 6:45 p.m. She was running late because she'd stayed behind to help clean up paint spills. Her father always said to be home before dark, but she knew the route well enough. 3 more blocks, then a right turn at the old bookstore. But as she walked, the familiar landmarks started looking different in the growing shadows. The usually welcoming storefronts seemed to loom over her. She paused at an intersection, suddenly unsure which way to turn. Her heart began to beat faster as she realized she must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The screech of tires made her jump. A police cruiser pulled up alongside her, its headlights harsh in the dimming light. Officer Marcus Wade stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached. His badge gleamed dully under the streetlights. "What are you doing out here all alone, little girl?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that made Sofia's skin crawl. I am just walking home from art class," she stammered, showing him her sketchbook. "I think I took a wrong turn." Wade's lips curved into an unpleasant smile. "Wrong turn is right. This isn't a safe neighborhood for little girls after dark. Someone could take advantage." Sofia took a step back. "My dad's expecting me. He'll be worried." "Your dad?" Wade's smile widened. "Nobody's expecting you here. Nobody's coming to help." Before Sofia could run, Wade grabbed her arm. Her sketchbook fell, pages scattering across the sidewalk. She screamed, but he clamped a hand over her mouth, dragging her toward a utility pole. "Time to teach you a lesson about wandering where you don't belong," he growled, pulling a roll of duct tape from his belt. Sofia kicked and struggled as he bound her to the pole, wrapping the tape around her arms and torso. Tears streamed down her face as she begged him to stop, but Wade only laughed. "Maybe a night in the cold will teach you to stay where you belong," he sneered, stepping back to admire his work. Her sketchbook lay forgotten in a puddle, the watercolors bleeding into abstract shapes. Wade got back in his cruiser and drove away, leaving Sofia alone in the growing darkness. She pulled against the tape, but it only tightened around her. The cold began seeping through her light jacket as night fell completely. Hours passed. Occasional passers-by hurried past, averting their eyes. Some teenagers stopped to take photos, laughing as they walked away. Sofia's voice grew hoarse from calling for help. Her legs ached from standing, and her wrists burned where the tape cut into them. As midnight approached, exhaustion began to overtake her. Her head drooped forward as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The street had grown quiet except for distant traffic and the buzz of the flickering streetlight above her. But in her semi-conscious state, she heard it, the familiar sound of her father's voice calling her name in the distance. She forced her eyes open, heart pounding. Was she dreaming? "Sofia. Baby, where are you?" The voice grew closer. Hope surged through her tired body as she gathered what strength she had left. "Daddy. I'm here. Help me." Running footsteps approached. Then her father's face appeared in the dim light, his eyes widening in horror at the sight of his daughter bound to the pole. In seconds, he was working to free her, his strong hands tearing away the tape as his voice broke with emotion. "I'm here, mi amor. I'm here. You're safe now. Who did this to you?" As Sofia collapsed into his arms, sobbing, she managed to whisper one word that made her father's blood run cold. A father's fury. James Rodriguez cradled his daughter in the back seat of his car, his military training warring with his parental instinct to break down. Sofia had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, her face still marked with dried tears. His hands trembled as he brushed her hair from her face, noting the red marks where the tape had bitten into her skin. 20 years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to control his rage, to channel it into calculated action. But this was different. This was his baby girl. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. Detective Mitchell. A woman's voice answered on the third ring. Hannah, it's James Rodriguez. I need your help. It's about one of your officers. There was a pause on the line. James? It's been 2 years? What happened? One of your cops duct-taped my 11-year-old daughter to a pole and left her there. 4 hours. His voice was deadly quiet, controlled, but Hannah could hear the underlying fury. Jesus Christ, she breathed. Where are you now? My car, 3 blocks from Palmer Street. She's sleeping. Hannah, I want his name. I want his badge number. And I want to know why a cop would do this to a child. Don't do anything stupid, James. Bring her to the station. We'll take her statement, get photos of her injuries. No. James cut her off. Not yet. She's been traumatized enough tonight. I'm taking her home, letting her rest. But tomorrow? Tomorrow I want answers. Hannah's voice hardened. James, I know what you're thinking. Don't. Let me handle this through proper channels. We'll launch an internal investigation. Like the last 3 investigations that went nowhere? James's grip tightened on the phone. How many other kids has he done this to, Hannah? How many others didn't have someone looking for them? Silence filled the line. Finally, Hannah spoke, her voice low. Meet me at Carson's Diner tomorrow at noon. Bring any evidence you have. Photos, her statement, anything. We'll do this right. James looked at his sleeping daughter, remembering her whispered description of the officer. Tall, heavy-set, with a scar above his right eyebrow. Badge number 4471. Noon, he agreed, then added, Hannah. If this gets buried like the others, if he walks away from this. He left the threat unspoken. I know, she replied softly. Just, wait for me. Please. After hanging up, James drove home carefully, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. No patrol cars followed. At their modest 2-story house, he carried Sophia inside, laying her gently in her bed. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. In her room, surrounded by her artwork and stuffed animals, she looked so small, so vulnerable. James sat on the edge of her bed, his hands clenched into fists. The rage he'd been suppressing threatened to overwhelm him. He moved to his home office, closing the door quietly. His computer hummed to life, and he logged into databases he wasn't supposed to have access to, favors owed from his contracting days. Badge number 4471. Officer Marcus Wade. The screen filled with information. 17 complaints of excessive force in 5 years. 3 internal investigations, all dismissed. 2 shootings, both ruled justified. And a pattern, all his victims were minorities or vulnerable people unlikely to fight back. James's jaw clenched as he read. Wade had been protected, shifted between precincts when complaints got too loud, but never truly punished. The system hadn't just failed, it had enabled him. A soft knock at the door made him quickly close the windows. Sophia stood there, looking small in her pajamas. Daddy? Can I sleep in your room tonight? James's heart broke all over again. Of course, mi amor. Come here. He lifted her into his arms, feeling her tremble slightly. The police officer, she whispered against his shoulder, he said nobody would come for me. But you did. You found me. I will always find you, James promised, his voice thick with emotion. And I will never let anyone hurt you again. As Sophia finally drifted off to sleep in his bed, James sat in the darkness, planning. He had trained for years to protect his country, to fight enemies abroad. Now the enemy wore a badge and operated in his own city. Tomorrow, he would meet with Hannah. He would play by the rules, give the system one last chance to work. But as he watched his daughter sleep, James made a silent vow. One way or another, Officer Marcus Wade would never hurt another child again. The night stretched on, and James Rodriguez waited, a father's fury slowly crystallizing into something far more dangerous: purpose. The hunt begins. The morning sun cast long shadows across Carson's diner as James sat in a corner booth, watching the door. His fingers drummed silently on the worn tabletop, each tap marking another second of restraint. The manila folder before him contained everything: photos of Sophia's injuries, her written statement, printouts of Wade's record. Detective Hannah Mitchell arrived precisely at noon, her dark suit and badge drawing curious glances from other patrons. She slid into the booth across from James, her expression grave. "You look like hell," she observed, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "Sophia had nightmares," James replied flatly. 3 times last night. Each time she woke up thinking she was still tied to that pole." Hannah's face softened. "How is she?" "With her aunt. She didn't want to go to school today." James pushed the folder across the table. "Everything you need is in there. Including Wade's history of complaints." Hannah's eyebrows rose as she flipped through the documents. "How did you get access to these records? Does it matter?" "It matters if we want this to stick," she countered. "We need to do this by the book, James. No shortcuts, no vigilante justice." James leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Like you did it by the book with the Martinez case? Or the Thompson investigation? How many times has Wade walked away while you played by the rules?" Hannah's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I've been building a case against Wade for months. But he's protected. Captain Reynolds is his brother-in-law. The union backs him completely. And while you build your case, he's out there hurting more kids. I need more time. Time?" James cut her off. "How much time did my daughter have last night? How long did she cry for help while people walked past?" The waitress approached their table, but one look at their faces made her turn away. Hannah rubbed her temples, then spoke quietly. "Wade's working a double shift today. Northeastern District. He's been escalating, James. Getting bolder. The brass can't ignore it forever." "Can't? Or won't?" James stood, dropping some bills on the table. "You have 48 hours, Hannah. After that, I handle it my way." "James, wait." Hannah grabbed his arm. "There's something else. Wade's partner came to me this morning. Said Wade's been taking trophies from his victims. Photos, personal items. Keeping them in his locker at the precinct." James's blood ran cold. Sophia's sketchbook. If we can get evidence of that, combined with his partner's testimony. Hannah's eyes met his. "Give me those 48 hours. Let me try one more time." James nodded once, then walked out into the sunlight. His phone buzzed, a text from his old SEAL teammate, Marcus. "Got what you asked for. Wade's home address, regular hangouts, daily routine. Be careful, brother." James memorized the information, then deleted the message. He drove past Wade's house, a small ranch-style home with a well-kept lawn. A child's bicycle lay in the driveway. The sight made his stomach turn. Later that afternoon, he watched from his car as Wade emerged from the precinct, still in uniform. The officer swaggered to his patrol car, laughing with fellow cops. James's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Wade drove to a bar, the blue line, and went inside. James waited, watching. An hour passed. 2. When Wade finally stumbled out, he was clearly drunk. He got into his patrol car anyway. James started his engine, then stopped as another car pulled up. Hannah stepped out, accompanied by 2 internal affairs officers. They approached Wade's car, and even from a distance, James could see the officer's belligerent response. His phone buzzed again. Hannah, got him on DUI. Executing search warrant on his locker tonight. Stay away, James. Please. He sat there for a long moment, watching as Wade was cuffed and placed in a squad car. It felt too easy, too clean. 20 years of military experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that this wasn't over. James drove home, where Sophia was waiting with her aunt. She ran to him, hugging him tightly. Over her head, his sister-in-law gave him a worried look. She's been having flashbacks, she whispered. Jumps at every sound. James, she needs counseling. I know, he replied softly, holding his daughter close. We'll get through this, mi amor. I promise. But as night fell and Sophia finally slept, James's phone lit up with another message from Hannah. His jaw clenched as he read it. Wade made bail. Locker was cleaned out. Someone tipped him off. The system had failed. Again. In his garage, James opened a locked cabinet he hadn't touched since leaving the SEALs. Inside lay the tools of his former trade. It was time for Plan B. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. Justice and consequences. The precinct parking lot was empty except for a single patrol car, its occupant slouched behind the wheel. Officer Marcus Wade sat nursing a coffee, his bloodshot eyes scanning the darkness. The DUI charge had rattled him, but his connections would make it disappear. They always did. His radio crackled to life. Possible break-in at 1654 Westbrook Avenue. Any units in vicinity please respond. Wade straightened. Westbrook was his territory. He keyed his radio. Unit 47 responding. The address led him to an abandoned warehouse. Wade's flashlight beam cut through broken windows as he approached, hand resting on his holster. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Police. Anyone here? His voice echoed through empty space. Something felt wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he heard the door close behind him. Hello, Officer Wade. The voice came from the shadows. Wade spun around, drawing his weapon. A figure stepped into the dim light, James Rodriguez, unarmed, wearing civilian clothes. You're trespassing, Wade growled, aiming his gun. On your knees, hands where I can see them. James didn't move. Like you made my daughter kneel? Before you tied her to that pole? Wade's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed. So that was your kid? Should have taught her better manners. Lower your weapon, Wade. You don't want to make this worse. Worse? Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. I'm not the one breaking the law here. I'm a police officer responding to a break-in. You're the intruder. Guess I feared for my life. You're going to want to rethink that. Another voice spoke from behind Wade. Detective Hannah Mitchell stepped out, her badge gleaming, phone held up. Everything you just said? Recorded. Along with the contents of your home safe. Wade's face paled. You can't dash. Search warrant, Hannah interrupted. Signed by Judge Martinez an hour ago. We found your trophy collection, Wade. Photos. Personal items. A little girl's sketchbook. You're lying. Your partner talked, James said quietly. Told them everything. How many others were there, Wade? How many children did you terrorize? Wade's hand began to shake. You got nothing. My union lawyer won't help you this time. Captain Richard Torres stepped into view, his face hard. IA has been building a case for months. Your brother-in-law can't protect you anymore. Wade's eyes darted between them, like a trapped animal. Suddenly, he lunged toward James, gun raised. You set me up. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Wade screamed, his weapon clattering to the floor as he clutched his bleeding hand. Hannah stood with her gun raised, smoke curling from the barrel. That's for all the kids you hurt, she said coldly. As Torres cuffed Wade, the officer began to sob, all bravado gone. Please, I have a family. My kids will be better off without you, James finished. He stepped closer, his voice low. Every night my daughter wakes up screaming, I want you to remember something. In prison, you'll be the vulnerable one. You'll be the one nobody comes to help. Wade was led away, still pleading. Hannah turned to James. We got him. For real this time. Multiple counts of assault, false imprisonment, civil rights violations. He's looking at 20 years minimum. James watched Wade being placed in a squad car. It's not enough. No, Hannah agreed. But it's justice. Legal justice. Torres approached them, looking tired. The department will issue a formal apology tomorrow. We're implementing new oversight procedures, mandatory body cams, civilian review boards. Too late for Sophia, James said. Yes, Torres admitted. But maybe not for the next child. We're cleaning house, Rodriguez. Wade isn't the only bad cop we're taking down. Outside, dawn was breaking. James felt the weight of the past few days lifting slightly. His phone buzzed, a text from his sister-in-law. Sophia slept through the night. No nightmares. Hannah touched his arm. Go home, James. Be with your daughter. Let us handle the rest. James nodded. The warehouse door closed behind him as he stepped into the morning light. The hunt was over. Justice, imperfect as it was, had been served. But as he drove home, James knew the real work was just beginning. Helping Sophia heal, fighting for reform, ensuring that no other child would suffer at the hands of those sworn to protect them. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows behind him. In the distance, sirens wailed, not a sound of terror now, but perhaps, finally, a promise of protection. Healing and change. 6 months later, the community center buzzed with activity. Sofia Rodriguez stood before an easel, carefully guiding a younger girl's hand as they painted together. Her own artwork, a series of powerful pieces about survival and healing, lined the walls of the center's new children's advocacy program. James watched from the doorway, pride mixing with lingering sadness. His daughter had changed, more serious now, more watchful, but her strength amazed him daily. The therapy sessions had helped, but it was her decision to help other traumatized children that truly marked her turning point. She's doing well, Hannah Mitchell said, joining him. She'd left internal affairs to head the new civilian oversight committee. The other kids really respond to her. She's stronger than I am, James replied softly. Yesterday, she saw a police car and didn't flinch. First time since. They both knew Wade's sentencing had been just the beginning. The investigation had uncovered a network of corrupt officers, leading to dozens of resignations and arrests. Captain Torres had kept his promise about cleaning house. The reform bill passes next week, Hannah said. Mandatory psychological evaluations, enhanced background checks, community engagement requirements. Your testimony made a difference. James nodded. After Wade's arrest, other victims had come forward. Their stories, combined with Sophia's powerful statement at the sentencing hearing, had sparked a movement for real change. Across the room, Sophia was helping another child with their painting. Her voice carried clearly, "It's okay to be scared sometimes. But you're not alone anymore. None of us are." A small group of parents gathered near the art station, including former victims and their families. They'd formed a support network, meeting regularly to share stories and healing strategies. James recognized several faces from the trial. "Officer Reyes is here," Hannah mentioned carefully. "The new community liaison. Would it be okay if she spoke to the group?" James watched his daughter. "Let me ask Sophia." He approached her as she cleaned brushes. "Mi amor? Officer Reyes would like to talk to everyone about the new youth outreach program. How do you feel about that?" Sophia paused, considering. Then she straightened her shoulders. "We should give her a chance, right, Daddy? Like Dr. Torres says, not everyone is Wade." James hugged her close, marveling at her wisdom. "That's right, baby." Officer Reyes entered quietly, her uniform neat but not imposing. She sat cross-legged on the floor with the children, answering their questions, showing them her badge, not as a symbol of power, but of responsibility. "My job," she explained gently, "is to protect you. To help you feel safe. And to earn back your trust, one day at a time." Later, as they drove home, Sophia worked on a new sketch. James glanced over. It showed a group of people, adults and children, standing together under a bright sun. "What's that one called?" he asked. "Stronger Together," she replied. "For the new counseling center. They asked me to design their logo." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. His daughter, turning her pain into purpose, her fear into strength for others. At home, Sophia headed to her room to finish the design. James sat in his office, looking at the wall where newspaper clippings chronicled the changes of the past months. Wade's conviction. The reform bill. The new oversight committee. His phone buzzed, a text from Torres. "Review board approved new training protocols. Your suggestions made the difference." Another message followed from Hannah. Support group expanding to 3 more districts. Sophia's art therapy program is the model. James smiled, remembering his daughter's words at Wade's sentencing, "You tried to make me a victim. Instead, you made me a warrior." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of hope. From upstairs came the sound of Sophia's laughter as she talked with friends from her support group. The night that had started with a father's fury had evolved into something more powerful, a community's determination to protect its children, to demand better from those who serve them, to turn darkness into light. James closed his eyes, listening to his daughter's voice. They had survived. They had changed things. And somewhere in the city, another child would sleep safer tonight because Sophia had refused to let her pain be the end of her story.